You're listening to Funk with Fate, a show about being a body and cultivating pleasurable relationships with everything. And I'm your host, Mackenzie McCormick. This podcast will explore how our embodied experiences connect us to the world through astrology, philosophy, dance, magic, and anything that invigorates our aliveness. What makes us feel the most alive? Big inhale, big exhale. Now let's get grooving.
That was a great podcast, by the way. I loved it.
Thank
Oh, thank you
you.
so much. Yeah, thanks for your message. I really
No, every
it's
episode has been so great.
I really appreciate that.
Truly.
It's
Yeah,
crazy
truly.
to like have people reflect back or like see people's Spotify raps and be like, wow, you listen to my podcast. That's crazy. I'm just out here like recording them and like doing the intros solo and then just putting them out in the world and don't
Into
really know
the
the impact
void.
that it happens. Yeah, it feels like that sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, literally into the void. I feel that for sure. Just doing the thing and creating the thing and then letting it live.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah, but even like I was listening to your last episode with Chris today,
Mm.
and I was just like, yeah, I obviously don't have Mars in Scorpio, but I was getting so much out of listening to that, and it was so like informative, and it's always just beautiful to hear people's like lived experience of their placements.
Yeah,
It
it's
is.
even though everyone, obviously has their planets in different places, there are so many things that reach across like the zodiacal boundaries because we all have all the houses and all the signs. And so there's things that are pieces in us that we find, which I think is really beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, means a lot. I'll go ahead and say hi to everybody. Welcome to the show. A nice chill beginning. Today is Friday, December 1st, around 6 p.m. Eastern. And this is the Mars in Sagittarius episode of the Spicy Rendezvous, y'all. We have made it to the wild sign of Sag, and this is I love this. I love this sign. I'm super biased because obviously anybody on the show might know I'm a Sag rising. So this is Mars in my first. So selfishly, I'm obsessed with this Mars, perhaps more than many of the others. And I'm super honored to have with me today SP and Key. Y'all please introduce yourself to the pod, two people I love dearly.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Key, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. Hey, everyone. Thanks, Mackenzie, for having me on. This is so exciting. I love Sagittarius people. So this is so fun. I'm so excited to just talk for a while with you guys. But yeah, my name is Key. I live on Dakota lands just outside of the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and I grew up just over the border in Wisconsin. I think first and foremost, my practice is rooted in my terrestrial experience. In a very mutable way, I'm constantly looking up and down, like seeking to integrate the reflections of those things, the terrestrial and celestial. So my astrology and magical practices are earth-based and relationship-based, and being an animist, seeing the world through an animist lens is what kind of opens up the possibility for me to have profound and personal relationships with the planets and the plants and the spirits that I work with. And I find myself surrounded by brilliant astrologers, peers and friends, who come to their magical and astrological practices in very similar ways to me. And that feels so good to me. It just feels like home to be able to be surrounded by people who see the world in a very similar way like that. And my practice is rooted in ancient Hellenistic astrology, mostly with a sprinkle of medieval. But my influences are always changing as I kind of delve deeper into the practice. And I found astrology when I was 8. So before I knew of ancient astrology, I was reading like modern astrology books, which are a bit more cut off from ancient astrology, but I think have given me a pathway to like a compassionate, psychologically influenced astrology that I practice with people now. And I met Mackenzie at NORWAC and on socials, but we were able to hang out at NORWAC, and that was amazing. And SP, we haven't been able to meet in person yet, but I love your podcast and we've talked a little on socials. So I'm so excited to hang with y'all.
Oh my gosh, the moment that I had at Norwalk meeting you, like, just truly my heart, like so good. We have like matching yellow water bottles, like it's so cute.
That's right,
Wow.
we do.
It's so cute. I was, whenever we were sitting across from each other and I was like looking at those, I was like, this is it. This is it.
It was, yes, talking all about lots and fitness and all the things.
Yeah, and ascendant assemblies.
Yes, and Ascendant Assemblies, of course. Yeah, exactly. You both are in the Sag Rising group. Oh, the wonderful Sag Rising group of Ascendant Assemblies.
If you know, you know, basically.
Basically.
Absolutely.
Perfect. SP, tell us about you now.
So it's an honor to be here. My name is SP Hall. I am currently in Queens, New York. I'm born and raised in New York City, and I just moved back here on the heels of Venus retrograde in my 9th house. So I'm like starting a new chapter, basically. Before I forget, I just want to say that like my primary teachers, I have a similar kind of perspective as key, kind of Hellenistic, medieval, Islamic techniques and tradition, intellectual inheritance, I suppose. And my main teachers are Chris Brennan and Rob Bailey for horary. I learned so much from listening to Chris's podcast. I really like got a foundation there. And I've learned so much about the medieval Islamic tradition through basically like studying, but being a patron of Ali Alomi and engaging with his work on his Patreon and his podcast. So I just want to say that and kind of give a nod to them. Before I'm a relatively new student, actually. I've only been studying astrology for about a year and a half. I actually met Mackenzie at Norwalk as well when I was there in 21, more as a supportive partner for my then partner who was presenting at Norwalk. But I attended a day, and I remember sitting in Jason Hawley's Sun lecture next to my friend Aaron Tech Shipley and just getting hooked by the astrology bug. And the last year and a half has been a really intense process of laying a foundation of learning for astrology. And in that time, I started a podcast, which he mentioned, called Luminaries in and Out of Sect. I talked in a very similar vein. I feel like Mackenzie, myself, and our friend
and Shahir. Yes, Shahir.
We basically all got to know each other in Ascendant Assemblies in the Sag Rising group, and Shahir did this Venus embodiment series, which I had the idea for my podcast at that point, but they really motivated me to commit to doing it and moving ahead with it. And then, Mackenzie, we talked before you launched this podcast with this Mars embodiment series. So I feel like we're all Sag Rising night chart people, and we're all kind of like doing our part to honor and share the good news of the night sect. And I've learned so much by speaking to other people about their lived experience of their chart. And it's been a really wonderful way to deepen my learning and make community connections and all of these things. And so I think with that, I'll leave the intro there.
Oh my gosh. I know. The three of us are really doing the body work of the night sect. We are bringing the people to the bodies of themselves in so many ways. which is so interesting because obviously we're talking about it, which does seem to be more of a almost diurnal day thing of like doing the spirit work of talking about it and putting it out in the world and like broadcasting it, which is a very solar thing. And then we're taking essentially that spotlight, literally like the moon's reflection, and putting that on the night sect and saying like, let's look at us, let's feel us, let's not, talking about it and feeling it are not mutually exclusive, and it's goes all of the ways and goes in all of our layers.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting too that in opposition, potentially in opposition to like the solar endeavor of like lecturing, like monologuing, like all of us are having these like having conversations, having connections, these kinds of like embodied emotional conversations, which feels very lunar, feels very of the night in a way as well.
Yes, very of the night.
Yeah, as a night sect person, I love all three of your podcasts and YouTubes and the things that you guys have talked about, and I love a good lecture. I love a good solar, just like sit down and listen to this technique. I love that, but also like to really get into the personal experience and see astrology working on a personal level and an embodied level is just like, that's what really hits, it's just so good.
It is so good. Thank you so much for being here. I guess I have to shout it out and make it a big deal because this is the first Mars episode where I have two guests. And I'm thrilled about this because I wanted this to happen at some point. It just hasn't worked out necessarily up until this point, but I knew that I wanted it to be a mutable sign. Because obviously mutable signs are famous for doing things more than once and in a lot of different ways and multiples and multiplicity. And I was so thrilled that it worked out to have both of you on because I love both of you so much. And I'm so thrilled to have both of you on because I both love talking to you and also admire both of your work and what you do in the world as well. So that's important to me. Before we go any further, I want to go ahead and remind everybody that this is an episode of the Spicy Rendezvous, which is about Mars, which is a planet that can bring up very sensitive information, very triggering information, very inflammatory information, topics that can come up that can be very triggering, as opposed to, in relation to, I should say, anger, aggression, violence, injury, illness, things of the sort that can go on in the body that are unpleasant. And to, at all times when listening to this episode and my podcast writ large, to be aware of where you are in the moment and how you're feeling, and to listen to your body more than you are just listening to the words that we're saying, and to keep that in mind in balance before moving on. But moving on, yes, both of you are here because you have Mars in Sagittarius. So this is the first Mars in a Jupiter sign. So of course, obviously there's going to be two people as well. Like it just makes so much sense, truly. Like with Jupiter, there's always more. Do we want to start by showing charts and just like letting the world know who you both are?
Yeah.
Who wants me to pull them up first? You pick.
I feel like this is the hard part, so I will go first. I say it's the hard part because I mentioned to these two fine folks before we started recording that this is the first time I'm publicly sharing my chart. So I went back and forth on it a little bit, but I'm like, let's do it in true Mars and Sag fashion. It's like let's just go for it. Why not?
Let's go. Just bear it all.
I just want everybody on the podcast to know what a deep and serious honor it is. As much as Sagittarians are wild, chaotic jokesters in so many ways, there is such a seriousness that comes with it as well. And this specific thing, having it on my podcast and having you even say that really brought shivers down my spine when you said it initially before. And I just want to emphasize what an honor it is to be trusted in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to be able to do it with you, Mackenzie.
I just have to say,
hot spicy Mars, hot spicy Mars
with the moon. But I have to say how much I love that you have this giant Capricorn stellium. That's so great. And also, I think I'm excited to talk with the two of you today about kind of what you just said, Mackenzie, that like Sag is silly and like can be loud and all the things, but people don't realize that there are more like, I don't know, ways that people can be more private, or there's a lot more kind of like reflective energy that um I have seen from you, SP, at least in like the
Mm.
public sphere with your podcast. And I know that I have in my life, and I'm sure like your Capricorn plays into that too. But it's just interesting how the Sag energy mixes with our other energies and kind of
Mm.
expresses itself.
Yeah.
I
Thank
love
you for that.
that. So I guess for audio listeners, SP has Sagittarius rising with Moon and Mars both very close at 3 and 5 degrees respectively in early Sag, and then just the most massive, juicy, fat, delicious Capricorn stellium out there. You know what I'm saying, y'all?
Yeah, and Capricorn, I have the Sun, Saturn, Mercury for my Hellenistic heads. I have the lot of fortune as well, conjunct Mercury, and then for our outer girlies, I have Uranus conjunct my Sun, Neptune conjunct Saturn, um, and that does it for my Capricorn stellium.
Juicy, amazing. And like Mars and the Moon are so close. They're like 2 degrees. It's conjunct simply.
Yeah,
And
Beautiful
then
absolutely.
Jupiter in Cancer.
Key, you have, of course, also Mars in Sagittarius, but it's in your second house. For audio listeners, Key has Scorpio rising with Jupiter and Pluto in the first, and then has all of this Sag goodness in the second. So many planets in the second. Both of you have massive second house stelliums, which I guess I'm just now remembering.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's super cool.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's going to be such an embodied conversation. We have second house Mars. Well, you have a first house Mars, but like you have all the second house stuff. I have all the second house stuff. Mackenzie, you have a sixth house Mars. So it's like Mars is very in the body with us.
Mm-hmm.
So much because you both also, I guess, yeah, I did know this in my head, but I'm remembering that you both have the Moon and Mars in Sagittarius together. I'm thrilled. Wow. Thank you both for letting the pod know you know you. So just to start, obviously Mars is one of the malefics, and we're in this big, juicy, wide open Sagittarius house. Just this broad wildflower field of opportunities. Just to start, what are both of your, like initial thoughts about the placement? Maybe even thinking about it outside of yourself for a moment.
Yeah, the first thing that I think is so interesting with Sag is that there's no exaltation or fall in Sag, and it's a peregrine landscape,
Mm.
and it's like it's you're kind of moving through the space without much special attention, negative or positive. There's no one like exalting you, or there's no feelings of like, oh, fallen feelings sort of. Um, which in a way is cool because I think that lends to Sagittarius, like the placement's ability to like, no, if no one's really putting you in a box, then or putting like a lot of expectations on you in either direction, it allows you to expand in different directions and experiment, but it also can leave you aimlessly wandering and like kind of
Mm.
spiraling around and trying all these different things, and you're not really sure where to land or what to choose. And I think there's a lot of interesting manifestations with peregrine placements, but especially with Sag, that just have to do with kind of taking the winding road, and just being an adventurer and an explorer, but also having to deal with the struggles of feeling lost sometimes.
Mm. Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is like who is this character Mars? Um, so Mars is uh, the planet that separates, the planet that cuts. It's extremely hot and dry, so it's kind of like the nature of fire. And I think part of why we put it, or it, quote unquote, prefers the night sect is because its extremity is mediated by the night. That hotness is a little cooler, that dryness is a little bit more, not so dry. And so, I think when we think about malefics, when we think about these planets at the extremes, um, we think of benefit perhaps for the native by having those extremes mitigated slightly. I think of Mars as a this interesting planet because I think it can kind of rejoice in a certain place by sect as well as by gender. It's like Mars likes the heat, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the heat is good for the person with the chart. You know what I mean? And so Mars is this interesting thing because I do think it likes to be in a fire sign, but it's not always the easiest thing to deal with, and perhaps in a day chart, it's even more difficult when the sun is above the horizon. But as Key spoke to, Sagittarius is this mutable fire sign. So Diana Rose Harper has come up with like all these like wonderful images for each of the signs based on their modality and triplicity, and so and the image that comes with Sagittarius is like the wildfire, uh, or the I think another one is like the fire that you can transport. You can kind of move from one place to another. And the thing about a wildfire is, one, there's a necessity in wildfire. Um, Tree species like evolve to kind of depend on wildfire, which I think is an interesting thing. And it's very unpredictable, and it's unclear which direction it will go in. So, as Key spoke about, like I think of that mutability as there being things at odds, perhaps, or not necessarily at odds, but things just moving in different directions. Um, and so, depending upon the house that's in, um, that can mean a lot of different things. But for me, I think about it as kind of perhaps a complexity of action or a multiplicity of action with it in my first house. So, yeah, I think I'll stop there.
I love that. Through that multiplicity of action, meaning taking on and doing things in a lot of different ways, or just a lot of things in general, because that is something that I do feel that I often see in a very mutable Mars, is doing a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm. I think for me personally, it's yes, and it's kind of a both. Like I have a lot of irons in the fire generally. Like I have a lot of interest. There's a lot of different things that I'm wanting to do. But in addition, there are just a lot of different things like multitasking is a word that comes to mind. There's a lot of different things I will be doing at one time, or perhaps I will go through these kinds of seasons of an intensity of action. And so, like, something I was reminded of in preparation for this episode was my mom. One of the things my mom used to always say to me when I was a kid was that I burned the candle at both ends, which feels very, very like Mars and Sag. If we think of fire and dual fire, burning the candle at both ends, it's kind of to the detriment of my body or what have you. Um, is, I think, a great example of that.
Literally overworking,
Mm-hmm.
like overworking entirely. So because of that, because for you it's in the first and for you it's in the second, not just house placement, but also like in relation to the other planets, how do you feel that your like relationship with Mars has, I guess, developed over time from, a then and now, coming into planetary relationship with him?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. Well, I think like, so my Mars is sandwiched between the sun and a sextile with Saturn. So it kind of like thinking, I love the wildfire metaphor that Diana has, and I really think it feels like Mars is kind of just out there galloping around, exploring the wide open spaces. And then there's like a wildfire behind them that they're running from. And they kind of hit a giant mountain. And really, the only way to kind of get to safety or fulfillment is to go up, to kind of keep leveling up. And I think that metaphor for me is like I constantly feel the need to level up and like do it faster and do it better because the sparks are burning me and I've got to get up this mountain. And also having my Mars in the third decan of Sag feels very do or die. And so a lot of my relationship with Mars has been super intense. Like it has to be perfect. It has to be the best. It's got to be, you know, all of these really internally competitive things. That, but at the same time, kind of confusing with the like the multitudinous nature that we just spoke about. Like I also have so many passions and interests, and I don't want to choose between any of them. I see a vision of how they all end up working together, and I want to make that happen, but it's not easy. And it definitely does leave you feeling burnt out and kind of like, I'm giving so much energy to all these different things. Like, am I wasting my time? Like, how's this really gonna end up? And so it has been a challenge for me throughout my life of like feeling like I constantly have to progress, but in all of these areas. And especially since my Saturn return and this sixth house Mars perfection year this year, has really changed my relationship with Mars and kind of helped me start to hone it, even though I'm not choosing, like I still am doing all the things, but I've somehow figured out a way to like work with the flow of it, because maybe I can speak more on this like later in the episode, but you know, a Mars in Sag isn't a Mars in Cap. It's not like super efficient and linear. It's very non-linear, and it's been a struggle and a journey to like accept that and be like, it's okay if I drop things and then I pick it up later and I come back to it and whatever. Like it's non-linear, it's not really efficient, but it's what works for Sag Mars, and accepting that has helped a lot.
A phrase that just came to mind is that from what you said, it made me think of this like feeling of being in competition with yourself to have as many experiences as possible.
Yeah.
When
Yeah, I
you,
think.
no, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mackenzie.
No, you're good. Go for it.
Okay, I was gonna say that there's a lot of different ways that I've experienced my Mars placement throughout my life. And, you know, thinking about this, you know, talking in this episode, I was really struck by how mercurial astrology can be and how, like, multifaceted any one placement can be. You know, like whether we just look at it generally in the birth chart or we take that and look at how it plays out via like timing and things like that. So one very easy example to give of a moon Mars conjunction in the first is just like generally needing to move my body every day, or like I pay the price with what you would expect with a moon Mars conjunction, which is like I get kind of anxious, I get restless. You know, like I don't know if it's the Sag Capricorn Antisha, but like I can kind of get the depressies a little bit if I'm not like maintaining momentum, if I'm not maintaining movement, and like the moon and Mars are both associated with movement. So that's like one really clear example. additionally, you know, and there's like a lot that we could talk about going into this, but um, Moon Mars in the first, but cadent by degree, I have kind of seen in my own life as it's still very much a part of my personality, but it is taking on those 12th house significations perhaps of like a more interior um there's a more interior flavor. And so like throughout my life, like many uh people socialized as men, I, you know, the main emotion that I was able or allowed to experience was anger. And so a lot of dealing with that Mars, and you know, a lot of like the movement practice that I have has been kind of learning to deal with that energy that comes through that kind of conjunction there. And um, I feel like I had one other thing I wanted to say, but it's kind of escaped me. So I'm gonna throw it back out there, and if I remember, I'll jump back in.
You put it down and you'll probably pick it up later.
I absolutely will.
Exactly. That's why we just circle back to all the things. We have like 5 conversations going at once. I normally find with
This is,
myself.
well, that I do feel that that is really much a Sagittarius archetype. Is that I have a couple friends that I see regularly that are Sag risings, which is a blessing, honestly. Not astrologer friends, but people who are, you know, astrologically aware, but they just are Sag risings, and we've gravitated towards each other. And we've started calling it the loop back, whenever we like constantly come back to something. And it happens in conversation writ large with people, but I find it happening so regularly with my Sagittarius people, because they can just come back to something, be like, yeah, we left it there, but we're going to run back to it and get it and bring it back eventually, whenever we have the energy and the time and the space to run back to it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that about Sag placements and mutable people in general. I think it's fun. And I know that it can be overwhelming sometimes, or maybe some people are like, can we just focus? Like, can we get back to what we were talking about? And I get that, but it's fun. I don't know. It's just fun to have the conversation moving around so much and like making the different connections. And then, you know, nobody is mad if you're like, oh, what were we talking about? Oh, 5 minutes ago, this thing. Okay, let's get back to that. You know, I like it. It's fun. It's dynamic.
Yeah, speaking of that, so other fun like Mars in Sag things that kind of come to mind. So I have Moon Mars conjunction with Venus sextiling both of them from the third. And so very early on in life, I have like an Irish Catholic upbringing, and so there was like a bagpipe band in my hometown, and I started playing the bagpipes when I was in second grade. And so, you know, we can think about the moon, especially Demetra George in her volume 1 talks about this technique by Paulus of Alexandrinus, and she doesn't get into it a lot, but if you look at aspects within 30 degrees of the moon, it gets like, you can break it down with like the first 5 degrees being childhood and so on and so forth. And so I have this Mars and Venus within 2 to 3 degrees of the moon. And so, yeah, when I was like 8 years old, I started playing the bagpipes, and it's this very, the bagpipe is an instrument of war, which is why it's like so loud and kind of brash, like it's supposed to be played on a battlefield. Historically, like you're not allowed to play. If you like, I played bagpipes professionally as a kid actually, and like
What a flex.
you
Yes.
play the bagpipes outside of the church. You're not allowed in the church. But you can play the organ or the guitar, and you can obviously sing in churches. But like, because of the bagpipes association with war, it's not allowed in the church. And there's a whole like colonial history that goes along with that in Ireland. But anyway, that's a good example of like martial arts, a kind of martial art, playing an instrument of war.
And so interestingly played like outside of churches was the example you gave, because you know sometimes people can see churches as being a very Jupiter experience of religion and of faith and spirituality, and a place where people have big beliefs happen. and to have this like symbol of war played, like you can't actually be in it, it has to be outside of it, I think is very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love knowing that. I had no idea that that was the history of the bagpipe, and that is just so funny. The church is like, that's too loud, that's too aggressive in here. You need to do that outside.
Mhm. Yeah,
That's very
absolutely.
cool.
That's also such a Mars experience too.
Yeah, we need to take this outside.
Mhm.
For real.
What you said, SP, about your Moon Mars experience is interesting. I wonder if there is a similarity with other, like I know there's a similarity with me having my other luminary with Mars, the sun.
Mhm.
But it was such a similar experience to me, and I wonder if a lot of other Mars luminary people kind of feel this way, where they really have to get their Mars energy out, like through their body, or it's really important to kind of their sense of self. And also the emotion of anger kind of being this like a complicated relationship with that, and really needing to find a way to express that, because I
Mhm.
definitely relate.
Mm.
Yeah.
I saw this quote the other day. I wish I would have written down where I like the source of it, but it was essentially, it was a longer quote, but a part of it was talking about anger being not only emotion but a belief system, and how there are people that believe in like anger and force and aggression as their essentially like leading spiritual force. And it made me think of Mars and Sag, and the faith and just really the trust that people have in things sometimes working out whenever they just go for it, essentially in a Mars way, without maybe the forethought or all of the thinking that sometimes goes into a Martial planning process, but just being willing to trust that it will work out.
Mm. Yeah,
Hmm.
I big relate to that. I really do. Um, I don't know why I think of all the Game of Thrones references with you, Mackenzie, but I was thinking about Mars and Sag today, and like the quote that resonated with me most, which feels very descriptive of what you're kind of talking about in a way, and is I think descriptive of Mars in the first house of identity for me personally, is the part where the character's name is Mance Rayder, and he's like the king beyond the wall, the king of the quote unquote wildlings, and he's united all of these clans, this kind of wild clans, and he gets captured. And the quote that he says, I don't know exactly why he says it, I can't quite remember, but it stuck with me. He says, the only thing I've ever wanted was the freedom to make my own mistakes. And that to me feels very I don't even know why it feels emotional. Maybe I'm just exhausted from a long week at this point, but there is something about Jupiter and ideas of divinity and the faith to take action, the faith to know that there's a beauty and a kind of spirituality of in failure. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, it feels very kind of a meandering Mars and Sag of I can't quite see where the light is leading me or where the fire is going, where it's spreading to, but I'm going to trust. Uh, I'm going to trust in it, and I'm going to follow it, um, going where that spark leads. And so, yeah, that feels resonant. And I think personally, in my own chart, that's helped a lot by the role that the moon and Mars and then Jupiter are all kind of playing together, which I can maybe get into later on or in a little bit. But yeah, I'll leave that there for now.
I That's making me emotional too. I relate to that so much, and it's hilarious because the only quote that I wrote down for this talk today is like it's the same thing. It's a quote by Edna St. Vincent Millay, who has a moon Mars conjunction in
Mm.
Sag, and the quote is I know I have it here. I am glad I paid so little attention to good advice. Had I abided by it, I might have been saved from some of my most valuable mistakes.
Wow.
And it's
Wow.
so like that is so Mars and Sag. It's so like that wandering nature that we talked about. I think, yeah, there's, in a world where there's like a lot of pressure to get things right and get them right the first time and be quick about it and be efficient about it, especially with Mars, right? Because Mars does want to be precise.
Mm.
But I think with Sag Mars, we figure out the answers by doing all the wrong things first. And it's a
Mm.
very trial and error, and it can be frustrating, but I think that's part of what allows Sag Mars to have such a wide perspective to so many different possibilities, because we've walked in so many different shoes and we've tried so many different things, and it's like the mistakes are definitely like a spiritual experience
Mm.
once you allow them to be.
The willingness to do it again and do it differently over and over again is so beyond admirable,
Mm.
because it's not just about always getting it right. It's about the experience that you have along the way and how much you learn from every different type of action or attempt, or approach, and how each one of them, even though it might be a mistake, that doesn't necessarily mean that there was something wrong. It might have just, there is, something not being right doesn't necessarily always mean that it's wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is I was saying this to someone yesterday. I was outside of a spiritual gathering and they were talking about like someone telling them what to do or whatever, like saying something. And I was like, yeah, I don't like being told what to do. I don't like people giving me suggestions when I haven't asked for them. It's like, so therefore I don't do that to other people. It's like, cause I don't really know them. I don't know what's right for them. And I think it's a cliche thing. I think that comes up for me that feels very Sag in the first when someone's like, do this. I'm like, fuck you. You don't know, like, you don't fucking know me. Like, you don't know what's best for me. You don't know like my journey. You don't know where like, and it does feel very cliche to be like, you don't know me. Like you don't even know who I am, blah, blah, blah. But like, there is a real truth to it. And, it's like, yeah, none of us know what is best for someone else. And I don't know where the the divine failures that I'm experiencing today, I don't know where that's leading me tomorrow. Um, and that's a part of all of our paths, I think. Uh,
And a
these
part of the
kinds,
trust.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
A part of the
Yeah.
trust that you have to let yourself, ride.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like what you said of having faith in the next step. And I have my Mars and Jupiter are in aversion, and I often feel like
Mm.
my teacher Sam Reynolds likes to tease me that it's mutual deception and that they're just two drunk drivers trying to get each other home. But um I see them, I've come to see them more as just like that intuition and that voice, that it's just one breadcrumb that I've been given is on the
Mm.
path, and like I don't know where that's taking me, and it may look chaotic and weird to other people on the outside, and they might have advice for what they think I should do next, but like I just know to follow that breadcrumb, and
Mm.
it leads me in weird places, but it does end up leading me where I want to be. And so it's like really having faith in that inner knowing and that your path is yours. And even if it looks chaotic to other people, it's like you got to just trust you.
Yes. Speaking of that, maybe let's talk more like, specifically about that Mars-Jupiter relationship. I guess I also just realized you both have your Mars and Sag averse to your Jupiter, the ruler. For Key, they're right next to each other, Mars and Sag, and then, Jupiter and Scorpio. So they're right next door. They answer to each other. SP, do you want to talk about your Mars and Jupiter a bit?
Yeah, totally. And I would love to just talk more about mutual reception, or like what I've come to.
Deception.
Yeah, like
I would too, please.
I don't
Yes.
I don't personally see it as deceptive. I do like, okay, so there's this great Rob Hand lecture where he talks about mutual reception, which is like planets being in each other's signs in some way, and then like, but they're making an application. They can see each other and they're making a traditional aspect. So you folks know the traditional aspects. I don't need to say them.
People on my podcast probably either they know what those sight lines mean, or they're like, "Yeah, I'm just here vibing."
Yeah, totally. So when a planet's in another planet's generosity, or when planets are in a kind of generosity with each other, there's not an aspect, but there's a shared rulership, or there's an exchanged rulership. And so in my chart, this happens with the moon and Jupiter, and then it also happens with Mars and Jupiter in really interesting ways. And in that lecture, Rob Hand talks about you have domicile, which is the planet's home. You have exaltation, so where the planet is held up, the sign where the planet's held up. But then you have these quote unquote minor dignities, which perhaps maybe aren't so minor, triplicity. And
the narrator said that they are not minor.
They weren't minor. Yeah,
they weren't minor at all.
Not, in fact, minor.
Yeah. Not at all.
So we have triplicity in face and in term. And so I have the moon and Jupiter. They're in the moon is in Jupiter's diurnal sign of Sagittarius, and Jupiter is exalted in the domicile of the moon. So there's a kind of exchange there. And then Mars and Jupiter are in each other's triplicity and each other's term. And so there are these two minor dignities. And so there is some kind of like, it's not the most optimal or the most supportive, but there is a kind of support that I see happening between these two things, or between these two people. They are being kind of resourced in some kind of way. And I think the moon Mars relationship is really interesting too, because there are ways where the moon is like activating Mars. Any planet that the moon touches, it kind of like, it's like a shines a light on it, it activates it, it brings energy to it. So there's that, but then the moon and Mars are within 3 degrees. So like, it, again, going back to Demeter's volume 1, that's a condition of maltreatment. So it's a quite bad thing for the moon. But then there's also between the moon and Mars, because my chart is a night chart. The moon is the sect light, and Mars and Jupiter technically are both spear bearing for the moon. And so Mars is like the moon's protector in a way, but it's almost like when like a president or somebody like gets shot at, and like the Secret Service agent has to like tackle them. There's like this kind of thing that's happening where it's like there's like a protection that hurts. And I see that in ways in my life as well. And if we think about like, and Key, I'm interested to hear how this happens in your chart. And I know I'm getting off topic, but I feel like this is kind of.
But we love that.
We love it.
We love that
somewhere.
Yeah, if we look especially at the malefics and like the quote unquote like negative rays that they cast. So like, where is Mars casting the opposition to, and where is it casting the squares to? That's like a place where Mars is bringing challenge, because the square and the opposition are tense aspects. And so I can see that like in my 7th house relationships, relationships with romantic partners, what have you, when Mars, if I get into an argument with a partner, Mars can sometimes get very protective. And and I can respond in anger, or I can respond in a harsh tone. And really like what I'm trying to do is, there's like a part of me that wants to just protect myself because I feel like I have to do that. And there's like an overstepping that ultimately can be a challenge for that person that's represented by the seventh house. And I see that a lot. Like I see a lot where I have I feel insecure, or I feel like I'm in danger, and Mars wants to step up and protect. And it's a very beautiful thing in a way, because I'm like, oh, I want to, I want to like look out for myself. Like that's beautiful. But also it can manifest in ways that are quite challenging. And but to bring in the mutual reception between Jupiter and Mars, I've said all that, and now I need to think about it for a second. So I'm gonna pass it over to Key, and
That
we'll circle back. We'll close the loop.
Yeah, we'll close the loop.
Don't you worry, we'll close that loop. I that was such a beautiful way of describing Moon Mars in a way that I hadn't thought about before, and just how Mars can be the moon's protector. And when I think about that from the perspective of my Mars Sun relationship, and I suppose arguably like, the sun is more powerful than Mars in this scenario, versus like Mars is hurting your moon. But like the way that I kind of parallel what, your experience with that is that Mars has made it, I guess there's kind of like a two sides to it, right? Like Mars and the sun being together means that as I've gotten older, Mars kind of wants me to have Mars wants me to be a little bit more aggressive about my sense of self. I think there's a lot of ways when I was younger, and I think people, when you're younger in general, like you want to be validated and you want to be seen, and so you might not authentically express yourself because you don't want to be like shunned. And Mars has really asked me to kind of and I have my MC in the last decan of Leo too, and so that's like trining the two of them at the last decan of Sag. So that story has very much been like, you just got to be you, and there are going to be people who don't like you, and you can't mean like that can't mean that you don't like authentically express yourself. You have to have like the bravery to kind of just fully express yourself in that way, and not like people please or do things that would just be inauthentic to you. But then on the other hand, that Mars and Sun, it can kind of easily feel wounded if I feel like my sense of self is misunderstood. Like I so badly want people, in the past, like I've so badly wanted people to really see who I truly am, and like understand my motives and what I'm trying to do and who I am trying to be. And if it's misunderstood, it like deeply hurts. And I think that might be a Sag thing in general, just like really wanting to be understood. But yeah, so that's how it's kind of turned out on like a two-sided coin for me.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I feel that that is a very archetypally Sagittarius thing, that desire to be understood and to have the more deep layers of our belief system known, because that is a part of who we are. And I think that maybe a part of the Sagittarius almost archetype that people think of, that misunderstood or even flaky type of energy, comes from the deep willingness to sacrifice our belief system as soon as we feel that it is inauthentic. And as soon as it becomes something that is no longer true to us, it is very easy to put it down and never pick it up again, because it's no longer resonant. It's no longer in alignment with what makes me me. And so then that doesn't mean that we have somehow betrayed ourselves. That means that we have become more authentic and true to who we are. And that doesn't mean that that previous belief was wrong or that it's not right for someone else, but for that in our life at our time, we have now moved on from it and picked up something that is greater. I also wanted to comment specifically on what you said about the Mars Moon relationship, like the square and opposition and like the protector, because I will tell anybody, and I've said on the pod many times, my Moon Mars opposition is delicate. And I often like to think of in that relationship with them, Mars, I like to say that they're a crisis care worker because they're like plugging up like the holes on the battlefield, like fixing and wrapping the wounds. And then also I think of it a lot in relationships and conversations, and in moments of hurt, in moments of vulnerability, doing everything that can be done to wrap up those loose edges so that they're not fraying, so that they're not being lost or neglected. Yeah.
It's a beautiful image.
Yeah.
So we've kind of talked about it a bit, but I would love to talk about the Mars houses in both of your charts, the Aries and Scorpio houses. We've kind of talked a bit about them, but the Mars ruled places in our chart. Key, you have this like amazing Scorpio rising. I guess that's also, I'll just go ahead and put it in here. The Scorpio rising, Sagittarius rising solidarity is quite literally unmatched. I don't know if anyone understands, but I hope that they do, because it runs so deep with not just like you, but so many Scorpio risings that I know and have had relationships and friendships with, and just seeing them vibe, it's amazing.
I know. I love Sag and Scorpio placements separately, together. I just love them. And I think that even though they're in aversion, we really do work so well together. Maybe because we are both kind of like truth seekers in a way. Like Scorpio is not afraid to get in there and figure out the truth, whatever it is. And Sag is, I mean, I guess arguably maybe a little less intense about it, or they're maybe like a little less willing to kind of look at, you know, all of the gunk and stuff, where Scorpio's like, no, give it to me. But I think Sag and Scorpio kind of need each other in that way, because Scorpio can kind of check Sag where needed to kind of look a little deeper, and Sag wants to do that because they do want to understand like the truth, and they do want to expand their perspective. And Sag can help kind of lighten Scorpio up when they need a boost.
Yeah, Key, it's interesting to hear you say that, because I was like a little bit Mackenzie, you brought this up on my podcast when you were on for the Scorpio moon, and I was like, I feel like I don't have that many Scorpio risings in my life. Like maybe it's just because of your moon. I feel like I kind of collect Capricorn risings, like they just are in my life. And I'm like, is it because of the second house connection of like resources? And so these people are like a support to me or something like that. But I think it does make sense either way, you know, this very kind of and it's really interesting. Sag season is the end of the waning of the sun's light. You know, at the very beginning of Capricorn, the sun like metaphorically like hits its nadir, it like dies and is reborn, where it starts this new cycle of gaining in light. But you know, that first day of Capricorn season is in the winter solstice is the shortest day of the year. And so it's interesting that we associate Sag with this very hopeful, optimistic thing, and of course that's the connection to Jupiter and Jupiter's buoyancy. But I think whether Sagittarius has this connection with Scorpio or Capricorn or both, there is a kind of corrective thing, I think, with the truth that Scorpio wants to find, and the truth that I think is so important for Sagittarius. And I think that the thing with those two is, Scorpio's like, this is a little bit more serious than you're making it, you know, like, and Sagittarius can be like, come on, lighten up a little bit. You know what I mean? Like we can, there are levels to this shit. Like we can make the joke and then come down and like bring the meaning back in, and like it
Mm,
doesn't all have to be heavy. Like there's a beauty to life, and
mm.
there's, there's a, eat, drink, and be merry kind of. Um, so yeah, it's interesting to think about that.
It's giving me a visual right now of Mars being like, all right, so we have to get this thing done. So this is the reward that we're going to immediately give ourselves to do this nice fun thing as soon as we get it done.
Mm-hmm.
And how like that is like a big like motivating factor at times when people have to do things. They're like, hold on, I have an experience on the other side that's waiting for me once I just get this over with.
Mm. Well, the interesting thing about that quote that I just brought up, the eat, drink, and marry quote, is the ending of that is for tomorrow we die, which is like,
Oh.
let's enjoy it, folks. Like we don't have every day promised to us. Like let's
Mm,
find the meaning, and let's find the joy, and let's find the connection while we have it, because it's not
mm.
promised.
That is
That
so
feel
sad.
that feels very Mars and Sag, like ruling Scorpio right next to it. Is like we could die at any moment, so why would we not enjoy it for as much as we can right now? If there's nothing that
Mhm.
we can do to prevent that, and if we know it's inevitable, then we should rage.
Yeah. Yeah, and perhaps, I mean, it's a very curious thing. The eighth sign from Sagittarius being Cancer, like wherever
Mm,
the rising is, the eighth sign from that representing death
Mm.
and some of the more challenging things of life, grief, anxiety, um, is the sign where Jupiter finds its exaltation. And so there's this kind
mm,
of connection between the quote unquote preferred domicile of Jupiter, Sagittarius,
mhm,
and that place, that place of death, being held up in that place. Um,
mm. Yeah,
yeah.
and it is very interesting. Specifically, I actually did want to mention something that you brought up being the preferred domicile of Jupiter, because Jupiter is a diurnal planet, belongs to the day sect, and also, arguably prefers the fire sign to the water sign of Sagittarius and Pisces, its domiciles. And it's so interesting that this place where, Jupiter prefers has like this very intimate relationship with what has to keep going and in that way be reborn. Um, it really reminds me of a lot of experiences that I feel like people go through. I know some that I went through growing up in a really conservative place and,
Mm,
traveling and having like culture shock when you go
mhm,
someplace and you're like, wait, so this is how the world is. So
mhm,
that changes the way that I see the world. That changes who I am as a person because that now changes the entire structure and foundation of my belief system into being something different and looking in a different way because I just am now given more access to people, experiences, information, languages, everything that you now have as perspective and how that changes the very core of you.
mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm,
I have like a thought that's like tickling the edge of my mind because it's sort of
mm,
related to this. And I feel like I should just bring it up since I'm thinking of it because this, what you said, SP, reminded me of it. And then also, Mackenzie, you brought up like hypocrisy and kind of being willing to let go of a belief system once you've learned new information, right? And I think that
Mm,
that's such a beautiful thing about Sag, um, is that they can do that. But I know that sometimes Sag in popular culture or whatever, especially maybe Sag Mars, could be seen as like, I don't even want to use this word because it's icky, but like a crusader,
mm,
like
oh,
and very and like dogmatic because I've definitely heard people say like, oh, it's like, Sag doesn't have an open mind and isn't, all of these things. They just think they're right about everything and they're so dogmatic and whatever. And I think that's a really interesting thing about Sag Mars is that there's either, it's like the two-sided coin, right? There's either the fear of seeming hypocritical if you first believe something and you tell other people you believe these things and you stand on your soapbox, and then you find out new information and you decide that that no longer feels authentic for you. Like, what are you going to do? Are you going to
Mm,
just keep holding on to it because you're afraid of being seen as a hypocrite? Or are you going to be like, sorry, not sorry, like I figured out some new information now and this is now what I think? And the dogmatism thing feels like, you know, I think the thing with Sag is that we want to find that truth, like we're always searching for that one capital T truth, but then we realize that there's not one capital T truth. There's
mm,
all of these truths and they're all conflicting, and yet still somehow they exist and are here. And so how do you reconcile that? It kind of, if you're not, it kind of can make you crazy, right? So it's easier to just be like, nope, this is the way it is. This is the thing. We're going to ignore all the other things. This is the right way. And then you become kind of like that dogmatic crusader. But if you were to try your best to hold on to all of these conflicting truths and just be with the discomfort that like there is no one truth,
mm,
it's, that allows you to be, I guess, yeah, I felt very hypocritical when I was younger because I always felt like I had to have conviction, like I had to know what I thought about this thing and this thing and this thing. But so many times I would see the gray areas in
mm,
things and it made me feel wishy-washy until I kind of realized that that is a gift, to not be so quick to be like, yep, this is what I believe, this is what I see, and just kind of observe it and allow yourself to shift in that belief if it feels authentic.
yeah. Yeah, an acknowledgement of the complexity of the world can be a real asset, because it may give us pause where we might otherwise act rashly. And so I think it's
Mm.
really interesting, the framework that astrology can give us, because it's interesting to think of the relationship or the interrelationship that planets have. So if we think about Mars as action, um, and what you were just sharing, Key, reminded me of this. Like, I think it's a quote, but it's basically, to kind of paraphrase, it's like, uh, the possibility of our actions are limited by, um, basically limited by our perspective, limited by the broadness of our horizons. So if we can change the way that we think, we can change the way that we act. Or perhaps vice
Mm.
versa. If we change the way that we act, we might be able to change the way that we think. We might be able to change our mind. And so,
Mm.
like, what represents mind in astrology? The sun, perhaps Mercury, in the way that we maybe communicate, or certain ways in which we think. And so it's interesting to think about that, the idea of truth and the complexity of truth, being such a Sagittarian person, and then having
Mm.
my sun in Capricorn, because I really do. If we think about Capricorn as cardinal Earth, so the initiation of structure, and think about the sun as the mind, I really do have this strong desire, which is why I have these philosophy books. I studied philosophy in undergrad. Like, I have this desire to create a system of thought through which I might live truth. Um,
Mm.
but I think through attempting to do that and living life, I've learned how complex truth is, and how, it's like, between, somewhere between every point, the truth lies, kind of like, truth is this
Mm.
very, rather than truth being, like the clear, straightforward image of the sun, truth seems to me, something mysterious and difficult to grasp. um, and that
Mm.
that has kind of, I think, because I do think that Mars and Sag can be the crusader or the zealot. It can act on its belief system, but, in a potentially challenging or negative way. But it's, what is the belief system? um, and yeah, I think coming to see how multifaceted and individual, the embodiment of that truth is, um, has really helped me hopefully limit the ways in which I push my ideas on other people.
Mm.
And I think
Yeah.
having Mars and Sag too also helps that, because I'm just like, I don't want anybody to push their ideas on me. So, you know, I'm going to take a taste of my own medicine there as well.
You, whenever you said the word crusader and even zealot, it also made me think of the martyrs, the people that are willing to die for their belief. They're willing to make like that ultimate sacrifice for what they hold to be true. What the truth is in their heart, they're willing to do anything for, they're willing to do any action, no matter how grave, to show their commitment to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And to what they believe that big T truth, as you said, is. I really love the phrase, like when two people are in like an argument or even just a disagreement or conversation or situation that happens, there's this person's side and then there's this person's side and then there's the truth of the matter, usually is what's often said. And how you describe that between moving points, I love, because each person's individual perception of the truth is seen through their own lens. They can't see the truth through another person's lens because they don't have that history and experience and they haven't been through the same things. And so they have a different set of foundational understandings that is perceiving how they view the truth, making it that sort of initial boundary, to use like a nice malefic word, that boundary that you have to cross to go over to be able to, or maybe for Mars, that you have to pierce, I should say, to get through and to be on the same understanding and the same page.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes me think, like, if there's two people and their sides and then there's the truth. No, of course I lost my train of thought. But when you said like piercing through, it's like, I guess what I mean to say is that it's not that there aren't facts, and it's not that sometimes people act irrationally or say irrational things and your feelings are valid, but sometimes there's still the fact of the matter. It's not like that's not true, but I think coming at truth from that perspective of like there's points of truth in what each person is saying, like it's able to kind of pierce through that situation and like bridge the gap and figure out, like, have more compassion for the other person and how you might not be totally right and how can you see the truth in this person's perspective, and that just like makes relationships better.
Mm-hmm. I want to be very clear though, because I think this is really important, that I'm personally not a proponent of moral relativism or like the idea that the truth is relative. But I do believe that the truth is complicated and um, that it may be embodied in the individual in different ways. People live their truths differently. And I'm reminded of like my cross-cultural philosophy class in college, where I remember my professor saying like, even moral relativism can be a kind of absolute, like, so if we insist on a relativism, it's kind of a dogma unto
It
itself.
is, yes. I was just about to bring that up, which is how when people insist on something, being different in that way, that is still a defining decision that you have put on it and that you have essentially caged it within. Yeah, I love the way you worded that.
Yeah.
Interestingly, we have talked a lot about the Scorpio Sagittarius relationship in I guess relative to Mars. What are both of your thoughts on your Aries house and your relationship with Aries, archetypally embodied wise, with Mars? Because arguably Aries, makes an aspect to Sagittarius, and so they make a trine. They're both fire signs, and so it would seem almost as if there's in a smoother relationship there, but that's not how things always work at all. And that's not how our lived experience usually goes. And so even though the Mars ruled house of Scorpio is right next door to Sagittarius, it's still maybe, distance wise closer, even though the sight line isn't there. I'm kind of maybe riffing on this a bit for me because I have Sagittarius rising, and I have a planet in Aries, and that even though it's a trine, and it almost feels like there should be more of a relationship there. Sometimes it does still feel far away. Um, yeah, especially in relationship with Mars. But yeah, I'll let each of you share if you have any thoughts about that.
I can go first if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, trigger warning, Mars is can be a challenging planet. And also a caveat, again, the multifaceted nature of astrology. Speaking about my experience here does not mean that anyone with a Moon Mars conjunction has my experience, or anyone with Sag rising and Mars ruling the fifth has my experience. But with Mars ruling the 12th and the 5th and conjoining the moon and the moon's associations with the body or emotions, in my early childhood I had a very fragmenting experience of sexual abuse. And I bring this up because it kind of ties a lot of the Mars, Moon, Jupiter stuff together, as well as talking about the fifth, Mars's rulership of the fifth house. But it's very, again, the maltreatment of the moon, of Mars by the body, the planet that represents or rules over these fifth house topics of sex. So we would imagine that there's a potential for sexual experience in some way or another to be harmful to the body or harmful to the emotional life of the native. And another kind of caveat of that is that, um, conversely, having the ruler of the fifth in the first, sexuality throughout my life, partially because of my childhood experiences, has been one of the most kind of pleasurable, found so much healing through sexual exploration, through sexual acceptance. And so it's a very important part of my identity. And I think that this is really where um, the generosity of Mars and Jupiter comes in, because Jupiter, again, it's in the eighth house. It's in this place of death. It's in this place of grief and challenge. We kind of just like throw all the shitty stuff in the eighth and the 12th, and like wherever. And my experience with the kind of Mars Jupiter connection in this kind of disjointed way, where they're like supporting each other in this weird way, is that, one, I think that, like, um I wouldn't be sitting with you here today if I didn't have the experiences that I had in my life. And again, like, caveating that, like, I don't wish the experiences that I've had in my life on anyone, but I do think that they've given me the ability, through like a lot of therapy, through a lot of different healing modalities, uh, to find an understanding and an empathy for people that I would not be able to have otherwise. Um, and so I didn't talk about my childhood experiences for like over 10 years. Um, and a lot of that kind of, again, the negative configuration of Mars and Jupiter, of like, and Jupiter exaltation, if we think of exaltation as like excess, actions towards excess. I was like a teenage alcoholic, and I ended up getting sober when I was 18, which is something that happens, but is unusual. I've met people in my kind of journeys who have gotten sober at very, 14, 16, very young ages, but most people, they kind of come to that a little later in life typically. And again, through that experience, through those experiences of being down and dealing with these kinds of inherited health issues, again, like the ruler of the first in the eighth, also ruling the fourth of ancestry inheritance.
Mm.
Like I think I've been able to really understand people and like be able to help people because of the difficult situations that I've gone through. And so yeah, like there has been a lot of challenge um that I've experienced with like my personal astrology. There's been a lot of pain. Um but there's also, because of that pain, and perhaps because of like my relationship with Jupiter and the configurations of the moon and Mars and Jupiter in my chart, like I've been able to find I've been able to put good purpose to those experiences. I've been able to find a relationship with divinity that has given meaning and purpose to those experiences. Um, so yeah,
Thank you
Thank
for
you for
sharing that.
yeah,
yeah,
thank you.
absolutely. And I share it because, I mean, one, I think um, if I can help one person via sharing my experience, or like help someone feel not alone, or motivate someone to go into therapy or to seek help in some way, because a lot of people who uh, unfortunately a lot of people experience sexual assault, and a lot of people who are like socialized as men do as well, and because of cultures around masculinity, uh not a lot of people talk about it, and I think it manifests in like very difficult ways that hurt a lot of people. And so yeah, just trying to do my
Yeah.
part to just say like, hey, things happen, and we can carry on and find joy and find healing um through
Mm.
anything we really experience.
Exactly.
That is such a Mars and Sag thing. It's like no matter what you go through, you can feel better. It can feel
Yeah.
better, and that's a very real thing that you share. Is that that experience of like assault and so much aggression that people receive throughout different points of their life, and abuse um, is all connected, and there are so many different ways that we can resonate with each other and talk and work through these things. And the almost taboo that you spoke of, um, essentially like based on gender binaries and what people assume is acceptable to talk about. Everybody, this is one of the things I love most about astrology, is like everyone has a Mars
Mm-hmm.
somewhere. Everyone
Yep.
has it somewhere and has some pain. The human experience is not without pain in any way, shape, or form. And although each of our own pain is very individual and specific to our experience, we can still connect with others and have ways of being seen and being felt and heard.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And you know, Mars is the alchemist. And if any Mars placement
Mm,
is going to try to find meaning in something, it's Sag Mars. But I love what you said, that you indicated like the tricky balance that really is up to every individual person about like terrible things happen and you don't have to make meaning out of it.
mm-hmm.
Sometimes the individual finds that there is, like you said, you are who you are today because of everything that's happened to you. And yeah, I just really appreciate that you said that, because it really, sometimes it's really beautiful and wonderful. And I'm always like, whether I want to or not, I'm always like, what's the meaning of this? Blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's really an individual thing that is so important. Like sometimes you find a meaning and sometimes you don't, and
Mm-hmm.
there's no pressure to do that or not. Like it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I
The,
just to elaborate on that, if I may,
Yeah,
just very
yeah,
please.
of
quickly, and
course.
because again, I think it's like the Mars Jupiter of it. I think I was speaking to my most recent guest for the Sag Sun, Fian Cleary, about this, of like the ways that New Age spirituality can be perpetuating of structures of oppression, basically. And there's this like everything happens for a reason kind of narrative,
Mm,
which we can kind of maybe adopt in astrology with like ideas about fate. But I don't
Mhm.
know, we don't have to necessarily get into that. But I found myself in my late 20s, really, and I had like healed a lot from my experience, but I found myself at this place where I had really kind of lost faith in God, because I couldn't reconcile how something so painful had happened to me if I was
mm,
like loved by God, and if uh I don't know how to describe it, but basically, like, if I was being cared for by God, like, how could this thing have happened? If this was fated for me,
mm,
or if this happened for a reason, like, God is a bastard, and I don't want any fucking part of it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
place that was what I was confronted with, and the place that I came to, which was really just like I felt like I, just made this kind of half pivot and found this completely new perspective of like shit happens, like life happens, and sometimes it sucks and sometimes it's painful, and no one is required to make meaning of it. No one has to do that at all. But I found that for myself, the way that God fit into that was that I was able to find some kind of meaning from it and some ability to
mm,
like show the wound, you know what I mean? Have connection with other people more readily and more easily because of that. And it wasn't that like God made that happen. God carried me through that.
mm,
God walked with me through that. So that was just my process. And again, my truth is my truth, and it doesn't have to be your truth. But yeah.
mm. That is so Sag. I just want to also say how Sag that statement is, because that is a very key theme. Is like, this is my truth, and if your truth is different, then I respect that.
Yeah.
Um, and also something that you both kind of were talking about is that concept of fate, and I feel like that is a very Mars and Sag topic, is like being fated for shitty things to happen. Because I want to be very clear when I say that I don't think anyone deserves to have things bad happen to them. No one deserves to live in pain or suffering or anything of the sort. Unfortunately, being humans, though, pain and suffering is a thing that we feel,
Mm-hmm.
and is a thing that happens to all of us in a certain way, regardless of our life structure. Even the most privileged people in the world have complaints. They argue with their spouse, probably. Like, everyone has pain that comes to them and that happens, and shitty things happen, unfortunately. And that doesn't mean that there has to be some greater meaning for it, but that means that we can find it in there. um you know yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm thinking about again, this is like a total aside, like a maybe absurd aside, but people who make $1 million and they're like, okay, well, what am I gonna do now? Make $10 million, and it's like it can never end. And this idea of like happiness not necessarily coming with certain things, not necessarily coming because you have your material needs met. And that's maybe to me is an argument for like a redistribution, but that's a total aside. But it's what comes to mind, this idea that like we all have problems, we all have challenges, because um yeah, like a part of our being, I think, is beyond the material and cannot be satiated or catered to by just meeting material needs or what have you.
That reminds me of the hunger that's in Mars.
Mm.
Like the hunger that Mars feels, and especially in Sagittarius, the hunger for something bigger than just their body, than just being well on a physical level, and the hunger for a deeper knowingness that can essentially satiate them more than the physical realm ever could attempt to or dream to.
Yeah, I want meaning, baby.
Give me the
You know?
good, give me the good stuff. Give me the
Yeah.
juicy stuff.
Give me the whole thing. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, the second house and the sixth house for me. Yeah, and it might be a trine for both of us, but it's not an easy relationship like that. Um Mars ruling the sixth house. Yeah, it's so with having Mars very tied up with my like the sun, the planet that rules my like visibility and my my 10th house, and also being connected to like a very tight Saturn Pluto square in my first and
Mm.
fourth. It it's been um well, and my journey kind of with the second house, I remember when I first started using whole sign, and all my planets moved into the second from the first, and I was like, the second, and I was like, I'm not obsessed with money. Like, what is this really about? And it kind of led me
Mm.
on this like this search to really figure out what the second house is about, and then over the years, I've realized how much um the second house plays into my physical body, and like how I feel resourced by my body being Mars, and how that's connected to my health in the sixth house. Um I trigger warning as well for eating disorders. I
Mm.
had an eating disorder for almost a decade of my life, and um the Mars relationship just um yeah, it's just a lot of um just a lot of kind of like what I mentioned before, just like always feeling the need to push harder and do better and be more, and yeah, kind of wanting to excel past what is just normal for a healthy body, but like be something bigger than yourself, you know and I think I also, that 10 years of my life led also into the feeling of like w- how Mars moves so non-linearly, and like looking back at all the time that I lost being stuck in this really terrible place, and wanting
Mm.
to have accomplished so much more of all the things that I care about, and so many regrets of, well, if this hadn't happened, you would have been so much further. And really having to just kind of reconcile with that, like you said, SP, like shit happens, like
Mm.
things happen, and it I wish that it didn't, but it also has given me so much insight and compassion for other people and their struggles. Like you said, it's allowed me to help friends and loved ones who have also gone through the same things. So, yeah, it's just that tricky thing where it's like, it sucks that it happened, but also I have been able to make meaning out of it, and found that I also wouldn't be who I am if I hadn't gone through those things. Maybe I would have gone through them eventually in some other way, but like I'm happy to be who I am at the
Mm.
age of 29, and it is part of, my story. And I think a good thing that came out of that was like with the second and sixth house of like health and resources and like physicality was, you know, finding my way out of that eating disorder. And I I found weightlifting, and as corny as it sounds, it changed my life. It saved my life, and it made me like realize how the body is like, and how nourishing the body and like caring for the body, and just like, before it was like being so obsessed with just making the body go away. And then realizing that I can like nourish my body and I can make my body strong, and my body can, and I can be friends, and I can love my body. I can love what my body does for me, how it keeps me safe, and how it can, you know, keep me healthy to the best of its ability. So it has been, yeah, like the health, kind of health and body awareness of that second, sixth house has been so loud in my life. And yeah, I'm really grateful to have been able to like alchemize that experience.
Mm. I
That's
really
so
resonate with
beautiful.
I really resonate with a lot of what you just said, specifically relating to the second and sixth houses, because I have my chart ruler in the second house, and trine pretty closely my Mercury Mars conjunction in the sixth. And so feeling very much that like my body is the most ultimate resource that I have has been a very resonant theme in my life, of knowing that there's no more valuable resource that I can have, and that I have very limited amounts of, you know, than my own body. It's not an infinite resource. It is something that has a finite expiration date that grows closer the harder that I work it. And then also doing everything that I can to maintain it. So I very, very much feel that. Thank you for bringing all those things up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, yeah, having like feeling that way, that your body is the most ultimate resource, is really beautiful and cool in a way, that you can have that trusting relationship with your body, but it also is a lot of fucking pressure, right? Because like you said, it's a finite resource, and your body is not gonna be a perfect performer maybe ever, or at least
Maybe
not for
ever.
forever.
Maybe,
Like
maybe ever.
ever.
Actually, maybe it'll never be perfect.
Right.
Maybe it is constantly the reaching and the searching and like the clawing. It makes me like think of like that clawing on the floorboard type towards something that you
Yeah.
just can't quite grasp, but you're constantly just like fighting towards. Um, because like what is perfection, what is truth, you know, like what is that even relative to the human experience, when what we're ideally searching for or trying to attain might be shifting and changing every day. And the actual goal might be fluid. There might not be like a place to peak. It might be a very, you know, fluid flow in that way. There is a lot of pressure though. It's a very high pressure situation, because it gets to be very critical as well.
I
Yeah,
can imagine too that there's like a fear of death. If you're like, this is all I have, the body is so fragile, you know, like the moon is soft and, you know,
this is all I
fragile. It's a
have.
fragile thing. And
This is all
This
so,
is all I have.
yeah.
Literally, that feeling of constantly being on the precipice, even though like realistically, logically, if you try to bring it down to earth, you're like, I'm probably gonna live quite a while longer.
Right.
You know, maybe I could do the like the life technique or whatever. Maybe I could look at my zodiacal releasing, you know?
Or just life expectancy and statistics. It's like,
Right.
I got a few more decades in me, you know.
Right.
Realistically, logically, but that doesn't change that, you know, that inner anxiety or that frustration, or, you know, even that extremely Mars feeling of anger, of feeling like it's still not enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Or I think the thing that comes for me again with this like Mars Jupiter thing, it's like, what can I do that will make all of this worthwhile?
Yeah.
What can I really do in the face of that? And that's a difficult question to answer, and I don't always have, or maybe often have, the answer to that.
It's crazy that you're saying that, because this is something that I've actually been talking a lot about recently with my partner and my therapist. Is a very like similar question in that, which is like, what do I have to do to feel like I'm not irritated, like to feel like all of the suffering and all of the pain is worth it, is actually, you know, is actually doing something for me in a way. And what beliefs do I like hold tight enough to be willing to do anything for and make it like really feel like doing anything is actually worth it. Like, as they say, like putting your whole pussy into it, you know?
Yes.
Yeah. Question about lifting. Is there
Mhm.
any kind of focus that you have with your weightlifting?
These
Hot
days,
question.
hot question. These days, no. Over the years, I have moved into a very like fluid, intuitive thing. I started lifting in like 2013, so it's been like 10 years, and I used to have like really crazy splits and very specific, and I had it all written down and I tracked everything, you know, and I had my goals for the next week of how much I was going to lift then and whatever, but yeah, it's just become way more low key over the years. It's like I know how many times I want to get in the gym a week, and I have like a relative idea of what I want to do, but I really am like it's what I feel like I want to do, cuz like you mentioned with your Mars moon, I also feel super restless and anxious if I don't like have a physical outlet. And so I just kind of know that that makes me feel amazing. And so I just get in there and do what I know I want to do that day and go home.
Nice. Yeah, I asked just because I have this working theory that like I'd be interested to hear with what listeners think, or if they see this applying in their life. That like where your Mars placement is, like the sign, given the sign's association with the body, can help dictate like where movement might be helpful or something like that.
Oh,
And so like I've ridden my bike from San Francisco to LA. Like I've ridden my bike across the state of California. I've run a marathon. I skateboard even as
yes,
a
yes.
33-year-old, you know, like I do all, and Sagittarius rules the thighs. And so I end up doing all of this stuff. I tend to do stuff with my legs, like, and
That
I'm
juicy
just,
ass.
Hell yeah.
Well,
No,
you
that's
really
so
said
true.
Sagittarius rules the thighs and you weren't gonna mention dat ass?
I mean, I was gonna leave it to you, Mackenzie, because
Period.
I'm a little bashful. So
We knew you would say it. We knew you would say it.
Sagittarius rules those cheeks, y'all. Clap
No,
those cheeks.
it's so true. It's so true. Claps for the cheeks. Okay, I see what you're saying. I love that that has been your experience, and it's also been mine. I love doing leg workouts. So when I definitely focus on legs at the gym a lot, but I love hiking.
Me
I
too.
am a horse girl. I grew up with horses,
Oh my
so
We
God.
cannot forget that Sagittarius is horse girl energy. We literally delayed the start of this podcast by 5 minutes because I had to run around my house and didn't finish my prep because I was looking for this epic cardigan with a unicorn on the back because I was like, it's horse girl energy everywhere for this pod.
Exactly. No, you're right. We have to mention the horse girl vibes.
I've never even been horseback riding.
Really? Well, you have the cardigan of the unicorn.
Yeah,
So
I've never even been
it's
horseback
enough.
riding. I feel like at a birthday party once I did like a donkey at someone's birthday, but I've never done like the actual
Oh
real
my
thing.
God. Y'all, I just like put it together. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be a cowboy.
Yes.
Aww.
That's
And
like
that
all
is
I want.
Screaming.
such a Sag Mars archetype, the cowboy. Like you're just roaming
You're
on
with your
horse,
with your guns.
chasing the cattle. Oh my God, that's so amazing.
Yeah. Fun,
The gun toting cowboy. Yes.
fun Mars Sag stuff too, with like especially like the moon conjunction and like associations with early childhood. I learned to shoot a gun when I was like 4.
Wow.
Yes.
And
Interestingly, that's yes, keep going.
yeah, no, and I learned to shoot a bow and arrow, which is a little bit more like Sag.
I was
Like,
So
gonna
did
bring that.
I.
Yeah, that it's a Sag thing. I was so into archery as a kid.
Yes.
My family had the whole thing. Yeah.
like my dad wanted me to be like an Olympic archer. Like
Oh my gosh.
he like wanted me to like really practice and like become I was okay, but yeah, it didn't. I haven't gone to the Olympics yet.
Not yet. There's still
Not
hope.
yet.
There's still hope. Interestingly,
That
what
is
you
so
said
funny.
about Mars and like the part of the body. I have found that like in a lot of people that their Mars like sign, that's like place that they like have a lot of activity, but also that is a place that they get reoccurring aches and pains.
Absolutely.
So both
Yeah.
from the things that you do and also just how those things then end up being like an ache, because that is really like in a person's life, you know, real embodied. That is what Mars is in the body. It's an ache, it's a
Yeah.
pain, it's a soreness. And so whether you use something a lot or based on, you know, physiological things such as like posture or your job or just like what you do with your body on a daily basis, then contributes to where that residual Mars will sit in your body. Really big time.
Yeah, I feel like
Yep.
for me, I definitely noticed that with overuse. Like when
Mhm.
I'm running, I prioritize my quads. So my quads are like overcompensating for my calves and other parts of my leg because they're just so fucking strong. Like
Mhm.
not to like talk myself up or anything, but like, and
Do
then
it. You're a Sag,
They-
baby. Do it.
Slay.
another really funny Mars Moon Sag thing. I took a weightlifting class in high school because I had to, and
Same.
I won the wall sit competition.
Oh yes, that is a Sag award right there.
Literally.
I was like I didn't even know I had strong legs, but I was just like, I'm just gonna sit here for like 20 to 30 minutes
That's
and no
so
one else could
funny.
hang.
It's so, yeah, it's absolutely a Sag thing. I also was just born with super strong quads, and I also have had injuries in the past because I just overused them, and then I wasn't using my hamstrings enough, so I had to do all this stuff to kind of bring those muscles up. And I've definitely had plenty of like hip pains from either just like tightness or weakness in areas that I've had to bring up. It's always like that area of the body that gives me issues, if anything.
Yeah, definitely.
That residual Mars just sitting there.
Just doing the most.
Yeah, I feel that a lot, I guess, like in my Sag rising, because I've always been very like leg quad dominant. Like that's the easiest part of my body to gain muscle always. My Mars being in Taurus, though, I have residual neck pain and like upper back like pain like none other. Like up in my spine, up in like my traps, it's like the worst. That's like definitely where I literally have like cracked my neck multiple times on the pod, like in this episode, because I'm always having that. And so I definitely have seen that in so many people, that like the Mars energy in your body, like due to the melothesia, medical astrology, like astrological man of the placements through the body, that ends up being a place that stores a lot of aches and pains just from the overuse of life or the overuse of like physical activity that is specifically related and works those muscles. It's so wild that both of you are like juicy quad people.
Yes.
That ass is fat. That ass is fat, y'all.
Truly, truly. Well, and it's funny what you said about the neck thing reminded me that it definitely body pains happen by transit too, because pretty much every year, not every couple years, that Mars gets into Scorpio and opposes Uranus, I have such terrible neck pain. It'll be like out of nowhere, it just suddenly comes, and I have it for 6 weeks, and I'm doing all these things and trying to get rid of it, especially when the nodes were in Scorpio and Taurus. And then like as soon as Mars goes into Sag, it's like, oh, magically it's gone.
Wow.
God, those Mars transits in Taurus and Scorpio during the node cycle was not it. I'll just go on record saying that was not it.
It was rough times.
Rough times for sure. Man, I had a thought about a Mars Jupiter thing when we were talking about the fat ass thing, and I was like, I'm gonna come back to it, but then the booty distracted me.
As it
Also,
does.
as it does. Oh, do we want to talk about maybe like humans, people that have Mars and Sag that we have thoughts about?
I do. I actually wonder though, and I don't know how much time we have, but I actually am wondering about your thoughts on the Decans and like Mars in your decan, because the decans are just so funny because they kind of are, well, I mean, the Sag decans are intense, and they also are like about kind of unifying your will towards something. And I feel like Sag being such a mutable sign, and all the things we've talked about with Mars being so like multi-directional, I struggle with how this decan storyline fits in that, with that mutability, because it's hard to unify your will when you have like 7 different wills.
Mm.
And that last decan where my Mars is very like, once you've determined the will and you unify your will, now you basically like go big or go home. Like, this is the performance, this is the moment. And yeah, I think it's just interesting. And I wonder, and I know like your Mars is in the first decan SP, so I just wonder like what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, the I was talking about the Sag decans yesterday, and they are really, really interesting. The first thought I think I'll offer is that uh Sag in particular, the centaur, is like this double-bodied creature, and in some text, I think it's Fallon's, but I'm not exactly sure. The first half of Sag is quote unquote humane, and then the last half is bestial. And I think we can kind of see that reflected in the imagery of the decans. Ostakopic calls the first decan of Sag, where my moon and Mars are, the poisoned arrow. And I forget what the second decan is, but the third decan is something like the dead horse. It's just like I get this image of a desert and like a skeleton, a horse skeleton, just like being consumed by the piling sand above it. Um, and so it's just really interesting. I think uh, the ways in which we think about humanity and beast and the bestial, or that animal, because the poison arrow is the part of Sag that is the humane part, and we think of humane as more civilized, but the thing that will kill you in Sagittarius comes from the human rather than the beast. So I think that that's just an evocative image that I've just been thinking about recently, and an idea I've been thinking about recently. um, how our ideas of in astrology can kind of overlap with ideas of speciesism, and how that can relate to animism or relational astrology, what have you. Like, how do we position ourselves above other creatures, or how can that be done? But I do think I find something that you brought up earlier, Key, that I find really helpful in terms of my Mars in particular, is just picking a goal, just picking something. And I see this in particular with like athletics. Like, if I just say like, oh yeah, I want to run, I just won't do it. But if I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do a 5K, and then I'm gonna do it, and I like create a plan to prepare for, that helps galvanize action. And I think that that's um characteristic of the poison arrow, this idea of picking a target and shooting for it. Whether you have a quiver and you are shooting at different targets, or you have like unlimited ammo, whatever, choosing something and going for it, I found is really helpful in terms of uh, effective action, or action that like accumulates in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I love that. That's really helpful. It's like not necessarily having like unifying towards one singular will, but at least like rallying enough to have a specific goal in mind. So it isn't just like a dream or, some notion. It's like you have a specific goal. Yeah, that's helpful. Dedicating yourself enough to it for it to be a specific like plan of action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wanted to double check because I didn't want to misquote, but the second decan is the bridle.
The bridle, which is
Right.
like the
That
what is the bridle?
it's essentially the thing that you put on the horse. It's like part of the kit that you, whenever you're horseback riding or like trying to tame or control, part of like the kit that the goes over the horse's mouth and reins and ears, like the whole physical situation that they go under, essentially to be controlled in that way. And how that has to do with the like oppositional forces of like the going and then the control of it. And trying to keep these things together in order to do something, in order to be able to succeed or finish or achieve or whatever it is, and how the wrestling that goes into that. That's the degree of my ascendant is in the second decan, because my ascendant is 11 Sag. And so that essentially the oppositional force of will is something that I am very intimately aware of in that way.
Yeah, that second, it's like the first decan, it's like kind of makes me think that like half the battle is just deciding what you want and which direction you're going to go, determining the will in that first decan. And then the second decan is like, well, now I know what I want, but how do I hone that? And so it's like once you have the horse and you have potentially the horsepower, like you have to put the saddle on, you have to put the bridle on, and you have to know the horse and the horse has to know you, and you guys have to work together so that you can actually control the horse enough to get it to go where you want to go. And then I guess the third decan is like off to the races. Like you guys are a team now and you can do the thing.
It's interesting. I not to go off on a tangent, but I just got a dog recently, and he's
Yes, talk about the dog.
yeah, my boy Knox. He's a very energetic puppy, and so I take him on rides on my bike sometimes, and I haven't ridden horses too much, but I think about what I know of like horse people is they have very intimate relationships with their animals. There's a very strong emotional connection, and so there's something interesting about um, not only like the tools that you need to ride this horse or what have you, but um, the intimacy that the intimacy with that creature that's also a kind of resource as well. So that like I know how my dog runs now because I've ran him on my bike a certain amount of times, and so like I know where he might stop along the route. I know where he's more inclined to pull. I know how he interacts with people, and because of that I can adjust how I'm operating with him so that we're both safe. And I feel like that kind of if we think of the centaur as the human relationship to the horse being so seamless that it seems like they're one creature, I think that second decan feels like evocative of that intimacy.
Yeah.
Oh, I love using that word intimacy for that. Like, yeah, because it's like a dance between you and the thing that like the goal or the thing that you want. And they have to work together and you have to understand it to like really be able to accomplish it. I love that.
Yeah, like how can you wrestle with yourself and then also wrestle with the thing enough that they are able to work together and be able to not even just work together, but to just operate like foundationally, fundamentally on the very base level, before you're even able to do a thing, just to operate purely.
Again, I don't know that much about horseback riding, but I think about the idea of riding bareback, which feels like, even more like you're so comfortable with that animal that you don't need a saddle. You know how to operate with them so seamlessly that you don't need those tools. So I wonder if conversely, I'm just kind of thinking out loud, the saddle or the bridle is an indication of a lack of intimacy somehow. I don't know. I'm just kind of exploring that a little bit.
This is making
Yeah,
me think of a very juicy sexual euphemism right now. um, and the
Do
riding
tell.
bareback and the riding bareback concept, which I will go ahead and say that is definitely in a lot of ways an analogy or a metaphor one could say for like unprotected sex or protected sex. And I absolutely do not want to say that anyone should have protected sex by any means, or that lack of intimacy is a bad thing in any way, because there should be a normalization of condom use in real life, and that not everyone should just be riding bareback with everyone.
Yeah.
But it's essentially
I was not even trying to communicate.
but I like that you said it specifically that way, because it speaks to that, you know, potential intimacy that people think that they're owed. And that people think that perhaps a lack of intimacy is a bad thing, when you don't actually have to be intimate with everyone. That a lack of intimacy doesn't mean a lack of trust per se. It doesn't mean a lack of understanding between two people. It just is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention just another like horse, not even pun, but just you use the word horsepower specifically. And I love that for Mars and Sag, of course, as like the horsepower being a very Mars thing, but you know, literally thinking of a horse with power. And I like the imagery of you see them like wild, like fields of horses just like running a bit like unabashed, nothing in their way, just like across fields. And it gives me that very Mars and Sagittarius energy of like having the force and the power to keep going, to cross these lands, to cross these distances, to keep going in that way. And I love the visual of that.
Yeah, and I just keep thinking about what you said, SP, about like riding bareback, and how it's like that is even an even deeper level of intimacy, and how it's like of course I'm losing my train of thought now, but like, yeah, if you have a bridle and all those things, like that's great, and like you can control your horse better, but like if you are like good enough to ride bareback on a horse, like you have gotten into the flow with chaos more than the usual person. And it's kind of like, it just makes me think about what we've been saying about Sag, like picking things up and putting things down, and how their journey might from the outside maybe look chaotic or look unpredictable, but it's like once you've figured out a way to kind of flow with that like animal nature or chaos or unpredictability, like there's a real amazingness and intimacy there that you obviously have with your craft or your goal or the thing, that you're able to like intuitively know it so well that you can do it.
Interesting thought or concept. Obviously being like, as far as horseback riding skill goes, you have to be, of course, like much more skilled to be able to ride bareback than without like saddle, bridle, all of that. But the notion that the saddle and the bridle, even being able to put that on the horse in the first place, is a level of intimacy in itself. And even being able to get to that point of wrestling it down. Of course, like as Sages go, like there's levels to this shit, right?
Yes,
but
that's what I was thinking.
people regularly, I feel like, maybe look at like bareback, for example, horseback riding, like, all right, this is like peak level intimacy, so that is the intimacy. Even how we're saying earlier, like the big T truth. And maybe like ignoring all of the layers of intimacy that you had to break down and go through to get there in the first place. And maybe the Jupiter part of that is, you know, being willing to celebrate every win. Like celebrate every win as if it's the last win, maybe, you know, because there's no next level of win that's going to be guaranteed.
Another thing that comes to mind is like, what is the function of this tool? So, you know, it's like, again, I don't know that much about horseback riding, but does bareback lend towards speed rather than comfort? And if you have to go a long distance, perhaps you use the bridle. Like I think about cycling, and there are road bikes that are really fast, so that it would be good for sprinting. But like there's a whole class of bikes called touring bikes, which are built to carry your camping gear and all your equipment so that you can go long distances with comfort. And so perhaps that kind of comes in as well. And maybe we find the answer in the third decan. I don't know, but I'm curious, like talking about intimacy, and then maybe I'm getting the name of the third decan wrong, but like the dead horse.
It's, I think, a horse's skull, but yeah, like dead
skull.
horse. Yeah.
Yeah. So something is being, there's a casualty. Something is being, what's the word? Like given up.
Sacrificed.
Yeah,
That's my favorite one of my top favorite words for mutability as a whole is sacrifice. There are different pieces of it I find in all of the mutable signs, but that's like one of my top words for mutability, because it's the thing, as opposed to like the thing that you are initiating or the thing that you are maintaining, it's the thing you're sacrificing, you know, in terms of the three modalities, cardinal, fixed, and mutable. It's the thing that is dying in order to be reborn. And for Sag, in so many ways, that is like the shred of our authenticity, our belief system, our who we are, and that necessity of putting it down and picking up something else, like as you said so honestly, in my opinion, like perfectly, is like having to put something down in order to pick something up. As my partner loves to say to me whenever I do things, he'll say, okay, so it looks like you added something to your plate, and that's amazing. I'm so happy for you that you're excited about that. So what are you gonna take off of your plate to make room for that? And of course, my answer is that I want to take off absolutely fucking nothing because I want to do everything. But that's not realistic.
Oh, that is so funny. The amount of times I've had those conversations with partners.
Yeah. Even right now, I'm like, but is it not realistic though? Like, is
realism? But right, is it? What is realism though?
Don't tell me what's realistic or not.
And this is such an important thing, I think, about Sagittarius and Jupiter. We literally can just fucking believe ourselves into a new existence for real. Like, I think like Mackenzie.
Delulu.
Delulu is the Salulu. I say this all the time to people. Delulu is the Salulu.
Sometimes I wonder if like that's why we have like these Saturnians around us, Mackenzie. Like, I know your partner is very Saturnian because they're like, but like, can you actually do that? Like, and yeah, perhaps that's like the Saturnian Jupiterian thing where the Saturnian's like, that's not gonna happen, and you're like, watch me like believe it into existence.
Literally me. Yeah, I've said this so many times, I've showed my chart on the pod, but yeah, my chart ruler is like Jupiter and Capricorn, y'all. So like the war within myself constantly of like, you can't do that. You can do anything. That's not realistic. What is reality? Like just casual over the morning kombucha thoughts with breakfast every day. And I think it is very real though, in a lot of ways. And this is a lot of the benefic-malefic relationship too, of like the optimism and then getting checked. And then on the converse of that, like the suffering and then the hope that I feel like very eloquently in the Mars and Sag experience comes with the endless and abundance amounts of hope that you can have in the face of crisis, in the face of pain. That I really, really love to see and feel and be around.
Right. And again, to quote the wise Michael Scott, who quotes the wise Wayne Gretzky, you miss 100% of the shots you do not take.
Slay.
Which I feel so like I'm never going to know if I can't do it unless I give it a try.
Exactly. And that's the thing is, and this is like what my kind of word of advice would be to Sag, or like the people who love Sag, right? If you have a Sag Mars in your life, like I want to say don't make them choose, but I totally understand where your partner is coming from, Mackenzie. I think the thing is like, if you love a Sag Mars, like, be patient with their process and encourage them to like have compassion for their multi-directional process, and like let them make mistakes, because they probably aren't going to listen to you if you're like, I know that you like that, but this is ridiculous. Like, you just can't possibly do this. Like, don't be rude. Okay, we can do whatever we set our minds to, and at least be, you know, like, maybe you are like, that does sound like a lot, but okay, let's see what happens. Like, what's your plan? What are you going to do? Like, kind of help them maybe make a structure around it. And if they fail, like, let them fail, because we need to, like we've talked about, the failure is part of our journey. It's a sacred process. And just, if we're not allowed to fail, or if we have people in our lives who are like, that's just not realistic, you can't do that, then we don't get to explore like the entire sphere of who we are and like push the boundaries of what's possible, because it might be possible. And someday we might be able to integrate all of those things that we want to do. Is it nonlinear? Does it take way longer than other people? Yeah, maybe. But like, it's just, yeah, I think we just need like space and patience and compassion to be able to do that.
Yeah, again, not to be repetitive, but like all I've ever wanted was the freedom to make my own mistakes. And I think that that embodies Mars and Sag like so strongly. Like I want to live my own life. If I want to learn, if I want to be wise and learn from your mistakes, I will. But I want to take my own actions and live my own life and learn from my own mistakes and have the freedom to, you know, take a swing. And so I do think, yeah, for people out there who, you know, have a Mars and Sag in their life, um, to like do your best to honor their desire to act towards freedom. As far as it's really not hurting other people, you know, and like, doesn't feel, you know, and if you are offering advice, to do so in a way that is asking them if they want the advice and is helping them explore the possibilities rather than like offering judgment or offering
a prescription.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. That's beautiful.
I
From
do
both
too.
of
That makes
you.
me feel so loved and seen.
Let's look at some of these Mars and Sag folks that we have examples for. I absolutely love some of these, and I will pull up some charts for them. I honestly would love to start with actually the last person that was listed, which is Erica Badu, because I like love her chart writ large.
Yeah.
All right, let me see if I can.
I love to remind people that we get to claim her as a Sag Mars, even though she is very much like, I'm kind of like, okay, I'll let the Pisces have her, but like, still, she has a Sag Mars.
I mean, she's very Pisces, but she's got the Sag Mars, and I mean, she has an A-rated birth time, so like, I would go with the Sag rising.
Yeah,
I see it.
Yeah.
So yeah, for audio viewers, Erica Badu, A-rated birth chart, has her with Sagittarius rising, Sagittarius Mars in the first house, along with Jupiter chart ruler in the first house, along with Neptune in the first house as well. And as Key said, the Pisces claim her because she has sun and moon in Pisces. She was born on a new moon. Moon is farther than the sun though, so little sliver in the sky. I love her so much.
I know. She's such an innovator. She's wise.
She is beautiful and amazing, and I love her music. Like, she is so brilliant, but yeah, I love her music and personality, and she does take up space unapologetically in the world, which I so admire.
Yes, like you saying that is making me think of like whenever she does interviews and she introduces herself with like all 5 alias names that she has. It's like this is me, this is me, this is me, this is me. And she like it's just she's not afraid to take up space, and like her fashion is incredible. Like she's just, she's not afraid to like push the envelope and be herself
Yeah,
and be
visually, she
different
is so
personas.
striking.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know a ton about her, but I do like her music. I feel like the uh that Mercury at 29 Aquarius feels so loud. Like she's so has a Mercury in Aquarius rather than a Mercury in Pisces,
Mhm.
because uh her like communication is like so clear and weird,
Mhm.
and I speak
Mhm.
I speak as someone with like Venus in Aquarius. So no Aquarius slander here, but it just feels very, there's like an alien quality to the way that she kind of like thinks and communicates, that feels like super super interesting. um and the other thing, I feel bad comparing her to like her partners, but um there's like a joke about Erica Badu that like all of the people that she dates, Andre 3000, that's the only person I can think of, but like if you look at Andre 3000 like pre Erica Badu and then post Erica Badu, his style is like super super elevated afterwards,
Mhm.
and there's like
Mhm.
all of these examples of people that she's dated where she's like really brought something out in them that's like really really stylish and really cool and like out there, uh which I just quite appreciate.
Yeah, all of her past partners, I'm pretty sure that she's like remained close friends with them. She co-parents with them. It seems like, yeah, like you said, she brought something out of them and they very much admire her and appreciate her. And there's that's like an interesting kind of thing.
That is
Hmm.
something also that was making me think about like the Mars in the first, like in Sagittarius specifically, is that almost um level of respect that's given to her personhood and like
Mm,
her personality as a whole. And then like her legacy in that ways. Cause I mean, she has been in the industry, like making music, making waves for so many years and has done so much. That I feel like people almost underestimate that power, but yet it's not questioned at the same time.
mhm, mhm,
Mm.
Yeah, it's also interesting too, just like the ruler of the fifth and the first. So you would think
Mm.
this as like someone who is a creative person, perhaps as like part of their profession, which obviously, um, we see it with her. it, I think this might be more of a Vedic thing, but there's an association with Venus with voice, and so there's an interesting thing about
Mm.
Venus in the second house of resources and like the voice, this
Ah,
kind of very
yeah.
beautiful unique voice as like a part, like a big part of her brand. um so that feels really resonant and cool.
She does have a very unique and like easily identifiable voice. There are some artists that you can hear sing and you can almost get them confused for each other, but I've always found her music to have a very distinct sound.
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
And then I think like Mars and Sag ruling the fifth. And one example comes, I think maybe like one of the only
Mm.
music videos I've seen of her, but she's like out on the street in New York City, I think, and she's like taking her clothes off, which
Slay.
Mm,
or she's like has different outfits on and she's like taking them off, and at the end she's just naked walking on the street in New York City, which feels very like provocative, like Mars fifth house, but then also like like the multiplicity of like many outfits, or uh
Mm.
like that kind of thing feels, very mutable as well, to kind of like say this image about identity, really, with like the
mhm,
ruler of the
mhm.
fifth in the first house of identity and self. There's something about like taking off all of these trappings, and like what does that say when we get down to the bare bones of things about who we are as people.
Mm.
Yeah.
I love that.
And like I'm thinking about what you were saying before, SP, about the Mars being the protector of the moon, and how so
Mm,
she has moon on the IC, a very sensitive Pisces moon on the IC, and it's
Mm-hmm.
square Mars in her first, Mars being the ruler of her fifth.
wow.
And she has like this
Yeah.
famous quote when she's like, she was like debuting some, like sharing some new music, and basically was like, be nice because I'm an artist and I'm sensitive about my shit.
Yeah, I
Mm,
remember
So
that.
that's so like that Mars being protective of her, like it's her art and it's her heart. And
mm,
yeah,
I'm sensitive, so be fucking nice about it.
yeah.
exactly. You better clap.
Literally, you better clap. I love that. I love
Mm.
that so much.
Yeah,
All
that's a
right.
tight square, like
It's
an applying square with
so
the moon.
it's
Hmm.
real tight. Yeah, that's what
Mm.
I thought that too. I was like, that's real tight. And then I mean Jupiter's like on the ascendant too. So like as far as big personalities go,
Hmm.
I mean massive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't get her like huge hats out of my head. She's been doing all
Yeah.
these interviews, especially recently, where she has these like massive hats.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so good. All right. What do we want to look at next? Thoughts on anybody? Either of you specifically like any of those people want to mention?
I think like, well, maybe, I mean, Edna St. Vincent Millay, I think like we could maybe look at her chart. I'm not
Hmm.
super familiar with her, but I just was looking into her and I think she's so interesting. The other, um,
I'll pull her up.
okay, cool. The other people on there, I don't have like a ton to say other than I was kind of looking at women with Sag Mars placements because I think it's interesting how like when you think of stereotypical Sag or Sag Mars, you know, you might think of someone who is like very boisterous and outspoken and takes up space and all these things, but like women aren't always allowed to do that in the same way. And so
Hmm.
how does Sag energy manifest in women? And so there's like a couple actresses just based on what they've done that I can kind of see some interesting things with, like, are women allowed to be funny? Are women allowed to be subversive? um but yeah, we can look at Edna's chart first.
Yeah, just a
Yeah.
just a quick aside. I have to go probably in the next 10 minutes or so.
Okay.
But
Okay,
an example that I pulled up, or that I would like to look at if we have time, is Greta Garbo, who also has an
Okay.
angular Sag
cool.
Mars.
Okay, we'll look at this one
Let's do
and
that.
then yeah, and then we can just like talk about this one real quick and then we'll pull that one up and then wrap up. Yeah.
Cool.
Cool. Well, I just thought Edna's chart was really interesting. She was a poet in the 20th century. She was kind of like
Mhm.
Robert Frost kind of counterpart, like
Mm,
female counterpart. Um, and she was a feminist. She was like a political activist. She was a satirist, very non-conforming. She was openly bisexual. She had an open marriage. She was like called in some publication like the Herald of the New Woman.
mm,
And so she
That's
was
that's
just,
mainly what I have heard about her. Funny enough, is like all of the salacious, saucy stuff because that's so much what
yes.
she's known for, is being this like absolutely like spicy figure who's like willing to put her words and herself out there. Um,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. Yeah, so she's just like for her time, she's just like it's really cool the ways that she was uh privileged and able to like be non-conforming. I think
Mm.
even she like went by Vincent, especially in her
mm,
younger years, and her teachers would try to call her Edna and she'd be like, it's Vincent. So
nice.
she's, yeah, it's just like the gender
Slay.
fluid, sexuality fluid, like she was just not giving a fuck about what people
Mm,
thought. So it was pretty cool.
Ah, I love that so
love it.
much. And you said Greta Garbo?
Yeah.
Perfect. I'll pull hers up. Also, interestingly, I love that we're using examples of people that are like these couple examples that are actually like somewhat historical examples. Like they're not people that are like alive and active right now per se, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I love the almost like Sagittarian quality of like the history in that. And like obviously the first chart was like someone who's very well known right now, but like the contrast of the historical examples I love.
Totally.
I love that she also has Jupiter on the ascendant too.
Yes.
Wow.
And so the Astro.com biography, to quote, it says Garbo had a classic alabaster beauty with a bisexuality that was fascinating and aloof. So another
Slay.
sassy
Slay.
bisexual we got going on here.
If you if you are a Sag, it's probably likely, just saying.
Yes, this is not to say that every Sagittarius is queer,
No.
but if you are a mutable who has many tastes.
Exactly. Precisely.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I don't know a
she's
ton
an
about
icon.
her, but yeah, she obviously from that, but she was a famous actor who also was a spy in World War II. So kind of like very mutable kind of person. You know, we have Gemini rising with Mercury in Virgo, Mars in Sag, and then the MC is in this like really interesting 8th house placement. It's like very, I think
Crazy.
she's born
Fascinating.
in Sweden, so it's like high enough north that
Mm-hmm.
we have these kind of extreme angles, which is really interesting. I haven't seen many charts like this.
It's
Yeah.
a wild. I had a client with this similar sort of configuration not too long ago, but it was wild to talk about because they were also born just like very far north by the poles. Um, yeah, wild. And that in her 7th house too. I also one of the things that I know about her is that she did play a lot of her roles were often very serious and intense. Like a lot of her acting was like very, I don't want to say rigid, but it wasn't just like light, fluffy, like comedy, you know, like she did like hard hitting roles. Which I think speaks to a lot of that like Mars and Sag experience of like being willing to go there. I love that.
Yeah. So again, on Astro.com, it says after an affair with John Gilbert, I'm not too sure who that is. She tended, in theory, to prefer the company of women. So there's like an interesting thing of like multiple public affairs going on, a kind of unconventional, especially for the time, sexuality, and then just interestingly with her ascendant ruler in the 4th and like this most kind of hidden place in the chart, she was known for being reclusive and private, and just like spending time at home. So
Interesting.
it's
But
interesting,
yeah,
like
it's like, oh, I was just gonna say that like the nonconformist of the kind of Sag Mars, or like the freedom seeking, right? In the 7th
Yeah.
house.
Yeah, and I feel like that is something that we've said, I mean, just over the whole, like about these people and about over the whole pod, like the Mars and Sag experience of like how you said, like the freedom to live and to make that choice. And also like essentially the freedom to take up space and be the biggest version of yourself. And being shameless in that pursuit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I'll go ahead and ask if either of you have any like final thoughts, any wrap up places. We kind of already did talk about like potential advice for people with Mars in Sag or people who love someone with Mars in Sag. But any just like final thoughts about your own Mars in Sag or writ large, and also to tell the whole podcast and the world what you're working on and what you're doing and how to find you and all of those things.
You want to go for it, Key?
Sure. I think I've said all I wanted to say about Sag, and I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to talk with you both. This has been awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can find me at godspeedearthlings.com or on Instagram at godspeed.earthlings. I have a blog where I've written several posts about Mars and lots of other things. I have my offerings there. And I'm going to be offering some like experimental interview style offerings for some different Hellenistic techniques and some different things that I really want to try out with people, planetary phases, past transits or solar returns, things like that. So look out for that with me, because I'm really excited to kind of dive in and interview some people and do some astrological research.
Ooh,
Wonderful.
yum, delicious. I love that.
Yeah, I've said it all as well. For the time being, at least. Thank you so much for having me on, Mackenzie, and Key. It was a pleasure hearing your thoughts and meeting you. Yeah, I have a podcast. It's called Luminaries in and Out of Sect. We just finished the Moon series, of which Mackenzie was on one of the final
How did
episodes
we
for the
forget to
Scorpio Moon.
even plug that until this moment? I was just on your podcast. Can't even. Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, being on the moon, the Scorpio moon, like as like luminary of Sect podcast was an absolute joy with us and Krista. Our first threesome, and now this is our second threesome with Yuki.
Yeah, yeah. It was a wonderful conversation, very like deep, almost 3 hour conversation about the Scorpio moon. I was honored to have it. I just started a sun series, so I'll be talking to people about their sun sign over the next year, and hopefully, I mean, my goal for it is to kind of give the sun its proper place in contemporary astrology, like reimagine what it can be outside of just the pop sun sign astrology. That's kind of my goal. We'll see
Mm.
how we do over the next year. And yeah, you can visit my website. I'll provide a link to it for the show notes. I can't say it because it's like a whole long thing, but and you can also follow me on Instagram at SPL Astro. And yeah, I do natal readings. I really like doing timing readings. So if you're looking at your year ahead, I would love to look at that with you. I also answer horary questions. So if you have a question that you'd like answered using astrology, I can maybe help you with that. And yeah, I think that's it.
Mm. Thank you both so much for being here. I'm honored that both of you were here. I'm honored that this was the first Mars episode that I had two people for. I've been so hyped for that, and I am so grateful for everything that both of you shared about yourselves and your experiences. So thank you. And if you are listening, if you are watching, thank you for being here. Thank you for being funky, and I will see you the next time our fates weave together.